Okay. So, what are the Terraform activity you are working on in your current project? Can you explain?
Yeah, sure. So whenever we get a requirement to set up a CI/CD pipeline, or for that instance, any of the machine required for automation setup, or any of the machine required for the development setup, I create the resources on Azure using the Terraform. So I've worked in two ways, in different ways. I've implemented the Terraform code using the Cloud Shell, then creating the scripts directly in Azure DevOps, and then running the pipeline to create the resources. Then I've even used GitHub Actions to run the Terraform codes and directly write the code directly over there. And even using the Visual Studio, I've created the Terraform code and run it through that. So these are the various platforms that I've used to create the resources, and mostly it is onto the infrastructure of development or the testing, whatever is the requirement. And even for the CI/CD pipelines, which if there are requirement for creating the server machines and installing the tools onto it, so all those infrastructure tasks have been done using Terraform.
So, does Terraform support multi-provider deployment or not?
Yes, it does put uh, multi provider deployments.
Have you worked with multi-provider?
I haven't worked personally, but I do have basic knowledge of that. That it supports multiple providers. We have to just provide the different providers that we are using in the provider file.
Okay, and how to lock Terraform module version? Can you explain?
Logging the version, log
Locking.
the version.
Yeah,
Okay, locking the version or the file.
locking the version of the file or module.
Uh, so that there are no changes to be made onto the file.
Yeah. Okay.
I haven't worked on the locking mechanism.
Okay. And how to store sensitive data in Terraform?
So in my project, I have used a blob storage on Azure and created a container, and then using the key of the container, the TF state files are stored onto that.
Key container and blob storage.
Yes, on the blob storage.
Okay. And is it possible to create a virtual machine with Azure Resource Manager?
Azure Resource Manager, yes.
Okay. And is it possible to design application that handle connection failure in Azure? So, for example, suppose you design an application and
Mm-hmm.
how that will handle a scalable solution. If it will fail in Azure, then how will troubleshoot it and how will resolve it?
So basically, we can get the logs of the VM. So we can fetch the logs and check where it has failed, and also to make sure that it the requests are going on to the correct various instances that is working. We could use a load balancer.
Okay, how will you request more quota for your project?
More quota
Yeah.
in
Have,
terms of storage.
have you ever faced any quota issue?
No, nothing that I can think of in my project.
Okay, how load balancing work? Can you explain?
Yeah, sure. So load balancing basically works in a way that it is present before the instances. Basically, it is a mechanism in which it manages the inflow and outflow of any of the computing resources. For example, a VM, whenever traffic comes in and there are more than one instances of the VM that is serving the purpose. So load balancer basically checks which of the VM is currently available and responding. So based on whichever VM is responding, it sends the request to that, and then it processes it does the computing part and then sends back the response to the request. So basically, it acts as an intermediate in between to make sure that the requests are always responded to, and the application is not down. Basically, the computing resources are not down, and in case they are down, it even reports those things out.
Okay, so can you explain the resource hierarchy in Azure?
Resource hierarchy. So basically, we create a resource manager in the first step, which is basically a container, a folder-like structure that we can think of, and then we create the resources onto them. So whenever there are identical resources to be created, or say a resource has to be created, which includes various other subparts. For example, when we are creating a compute instance like a VM, so it has various other parts such as subnet, the network security group, and the storage, the VM itself. So all those subparts are also created within the same resource group, so that it is easy to manage and handle. And whenever, in case we want to destroy all the resources which is coming into a particular resource group, we can directly destroy the entire resource group, and that would destroy everything present in it.
Have you ever faced any challenges in Terraform?
Yes, there are few issues that I have faced. For example, when we if someone from the team or outside the team, if they happen to go and change the configuration of the resource directly onto the Azure portal, then whenever we do the next changes in the Terraform code, since the state is not matching, it results in issues, and then we have to figure out what it is. So usually those things are given in the logs. If not, we have to check what is wrong, what changes have been done manually, and then we have to basically, either there are two ways: manually we do the changes in the code, or we could import the entire infrastructure, basically the status, so that we have the updated infrastructure status in the code. So that is one issue that I have faced. And there are small issues related to the coding part that I was facing initially, like when trying to create different files for the input variable, for the output variable, and the configurations. When I was trying to run them for the first time, those were not working due to some configuration issues, some modules not being imported and all. So once the import was done successfully in Visual Studio, then everything worked fine.
So, could you please tell me variable.tf and terraform.tf are file? What is the difference between these two files?
So variable.tf file is basically a file in which we create the variables, basically the definitions of the variables, and where it has to pass those variables within the code. But the tf dot tf var file is basically a key value pair kind of file, wherein we give the actual variables that has to be passed in. So basically, it is the parameterization of the variables file. So basically, we just do the definition or declaration in the variables file, but the data that has to be passed on into that variable files, basically, which ultimately goes on to the main TF file, that is done using the TF VAX file.
Okay, so what type of variable is possible in Terraform?
So there are various variables that can be passed on. For example, when we are creating a VM, we would have to uh, send the IDs, like what VM we have to create, the image, or the size of the configuration of the CPU, stuff like that. Basically, whatever we have to give as a manual input for in order to create a resource, those kind of things can be declared in the variables file.
Okay, what is state file in Terraform?
So state file is one of the important piece of the Terraform configuration entirely. State file stores the current state of the infrastructure. So that file is basically created after apply is done and the resources are created. So basically it has information like the graph dependency, basically what resources are saved with some unique IDs and all. So it stores the current state of the infrastructure, and next time whenever we do a plan, it Terraform would compare the new state with this particular old stable state, and uh, whatever changes are to be done, it would compare and do the changes based on that. And in case there is any configuration mismatch, for example, as I told, if there is something that is manually changed directly onto the portal and those changes are not uh, done in the code, then those kind of issues are all reported. So in order for this mechanism of self-healing to be worked, um, all this information are stored in the Terraform state file.
Okay, for example, our business earlier they are using console to create the cloud resource, right? But after
Yes.
some days, they decided they will use the Terraform.
hmm
But after some day, they plan, hey, whatever we had created manually, that thing also we need to include in our Terraform code. How it will be possible?
So basically, there is a functionality called as import. So we can import whatever infrastructure was created onto the portal directly, and we can import that in Terraform. So basically, we get the code into the Terraform, and we can manage the infrastructure from Terraform next time.
For example, I want to create multiple source in not in the single resource. Suppose I want to
Mhm.
create database, so I want to create five database. I want to create VM, so I want to create 50 VM.
Mhm.
So how you will create the multiple VM or multiple database in one go?
So we can make use of modules here, and we can give the count of how many the resources have to be created, and based on the count, those many resources would be created.
Okay. For example, someone accidentally deleted your resource. So how to recover?
Uh, Recover. We have attributes that we can set so that whenever such type of accidental deletes are done, the resources are again recovered. So we can set the attribute life cycle attribute basically to those resources. For example, in this particular case, we would be using something as uh, create after destroy something. There is one attribute that we can be using so that after someone accidentally deletes it, the that particular resource is created.
Okay. Could you please explain the architecture of current project which you are working?
So basically, there are a couple of projects that I'm handling on the DevOps part. One is a .NET app which is being developed by the development team, and that has been deployed onto Azure Web App. So I have been responsible for creating the CI/CD pipeline for that, in which in the CI part, basically there is installation of the dependencies, and then the in the second step there is building of the app, and then is the unit test, and then in the first step it is the creation of the artifact, and then in the fifth step it is copying the artifact files onto a particular location, and then in the CID pipe in the CD pipeline the deployment is done directly onto the Azure web app, and then using the URL, public URL, we can test out whether whatever was deployed is working fine or not. And then the other project that I have been working on is onto a Java based application, Spring Boot application. wherein the application, once the builds are created, uh, the Docker images are created. Basically, those are pushed onto the ACR Azure Container Registry through the CI, and then in the CD we are deploying those instances, the Docker container instances onto the AKS, which is Azure Kubernetes cluster. So basically, we are creating nodes and then deploying them as a pod.
Okay. For example, one of the new requirement, for example, your business decided to migrate your Azure container to other cloud provider container. So how will you migrate that?
Mm,
Have you ever engaged any migration project?
oh no, I've not worked on migration project.
Okay, all right. And how frequently you are using Terraform code?
So as I stated, whenever we get a new requirement to create any processes, we do that via the Terraform so that there can be a versioning and whoever is working on the infrastructure and they can just view the code and have a look at it like what have been created, and in case the same replica has to be created, they use the Terraform code instead of going and creating on the portal. So all the creation or updation of any of the infrastructure resources is done via the Terraform. So whenever there's a requirement to create a new machine, be it for the development or for the testing, and setting up various tools into the VM, those have been done. Basically, the creation and maintenance of those have been done by Terraform.
For example, I don't want to use Terraform in Azure. So which tool will be help us to help like Terraform to provision the cloud resource?
To provision the cloud resources. So
In Azure also providing some IAC tool,
correct.
right?
We have ARM, which is Azure Resource Manager, that we can use to provision the infrastructure in
Okay,
Azure.
so what is the difference between ARM template and Terraform?
So ARM templates are specific to Azure cloud provider, so those cannot be used with other providers like AWS or GCP. Whereas Terraform is multi-provider, it would be used with any of the cloud provider. Then, as the complexity of the code or the infrastructure increases, ARM templates become more difficult to understand and it becomes very complex. Whereas Terraform, in Terraform, there is not much complexity involved, even if it becomes, even if the code becomes larger in size for the infrastructure provisioning or the maintenance. And ARM templates basically uh, require different type of coding skills than the Terraform. So that is specific only to that provider. So those coding, those codes would not work with other providers. Whereas in Terraform, whatever code is being developed, if the provider is changed and whatever configuration data is changed, then the same code could be used with other providers as well.
O-
And
Okay,
uh,
okay, all right. So could you please tell me what are the Terraform command is available and that command is using for what? Just explain in short.
Terraform commands. So Terraform hyphen version or Terraform hyphen version is used to check the Terraform version,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have Terraform init. Basically, that particular command is used to initialize the Terraform code. Basically, it downloads the provider plugins, which cloud provider we are using, and then the next step would be Terraform. A plan minus o, then the file name. So in this particular step, basically, if we look at the configuration file, basically the code of the Terraform, and I basically make a plan of what has to be created and would create different and would assign values to it, whatever could be, and whatever dynamic values that could be assigned after creation of resources, those will not be having any value and would be displayed as would be known after apply. And then the next step would be to the next step would be Terraform apply, followed by the file name, which would basically execute the file that was created in the second step, which is in plan, and create the actual infrastructure um, in the cloud provider wherever we are running it. And then we have Terraform destroy, which will destroy all the resources which have been created in case we want to destroy anything, or we are creating the infrastructure for testing purpose. So once testing is done, we could go ahead and destroy all the all the resources that have been created.
Suppose in your team member, someone who has access in Terraform, but they run the Terraform destroy, then the everything will be destroy, right?
Yes.
So is it possible to prevent this kind of situation?
Yes, we on those kind of resources we can create a lifecycle attribute as prevent destroy, and assign that to the resource so that no one intentionally or unintentionally can also destroy those resources.
Okay, so what is the difference between local state file and remote state file?
So local state file is something which is stored onto the uh, local directly wherever the Terraform code is residing. So that is a way, that is the simplest way to uh, create store the TF state file, which is not storing it elsewhere, and but it would compromise the code. It would compromise with the code in the sense anyone could go and delete that particular file, which would destroy, which would basically um, make it difficult for the next time to run the Terraform code. Whereas storing the TF state remotely is the case wherein we are storing the TF state file onto a different location, for example, in storage of any of the cloud provider, so that it is safe over there and it that is not saved with the other Terraform files. So no one can go and delete that particular file. And even in terms of team collaboration, it is better to store all those files over there so that the regular Terraform code could be shared without any issue in getting the TF state file destroyed accidentally.
Okay, what is Terraform workspace?
Terraform workspace.
Yes.
Uh, no, I'm not sure.
Have you ever worked with multi-environment like UAT development and prod?
Yes, I have created resources for different environments.
So how state file is managed for different environment?
Uh, so for each one of them, there are different containers created onto the blob storage and stored over there with a tag.